Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another wonderful episode of Baking with Bryan Live. I'm Bryan, and I'm welcoming you into my kitchen to bake along with me and hopefully learn some new things and have a good time with us baking and having fun. So this week we are going to be making butterscotch pecan blondies, or pecan butterscotch blondies. Last week we did brownies, and so this week we're doing kind of like the cousin to the brownie, which is the blondie. This recipe is again a really good recipe. I don't give you any bad recipes. Blondies, like brownies, are pretty versatile. You can kind of mix and match what kind of flavors you add, what kind of chips. If you use chocolate, if you use butterscotch, there's like 1,000 different kinds of chocolate, different flavored chocolate chips now these days. So pretty much you can mix the nuts, you can change things around, but the base recipe for the blondie, it's a really good, it's a buttery, sweet, almost caramelly kind of bar and dish. So it's really good, and I'm really excited to share it with you. I'm just checking in with my viewers. Alright, so I think we're going to get started. Before we get started, I wanted to show you one of the new things that I got, a couple of new things that I got, thanks to some very generous contributions from viewers like you. So, do we have the overhead? Okay, so I got it's called an induction burner, and so it's pretty much, I'll show you this. We're having some difficulties with our overhead camera today. So this is the burner. This is it. It is electric, and it's induction. So what induction means is that there are magnets inside of this unit that interact with the pot that I use. So you have to use a magnetic pot. You can't use like aluminum. I don't think copper will work either, but like a magnetic stainless steel. The best thing to do to test to see if your pots are compatible with an induction burner is to take a magnet off your fridge and just stick it to it. If it sticks, it'll work with the induction. So yeah, this is one of the toys that I got. The great thing about it is that it's portable, so I can move it around. So I can cook stuff in front of you here instead of having to turn back to the stove. So yeah, made possible by wonderful donations from some of my viewers. I also got some new spatulas, which is very exciting for a pastry chef, getting new spatulas. One is a spoonula, one is a spatula. Super exciting. Obviously the difference, this is more of a spoon, this is more of a spat. So we're going to be using the induction burner today to do what we do. So I'm going to get started with the recipe. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to melt the butter. So we have 11 ounces of unsalted butter in the pot. I'm going to turn the burner on. And it doesn't need to be super high. So what it does is the magnets interact with the metal in the magnetic metal in the pot, and it only creates heat in the pot. So it's super efficient because you're not losing any heat. Like if you have a gas range, if you put your hands around it, you'll feel all the heat escaping, or even sometimes an electric range. What this does, so long as you stay within a certain area on the burner, it only creates heat in the pot. So no matter what size pot you use, it's only heating that size pot. So you're not losing any energy. You're not losing any of the heat. Super efficient. Works super quick too. It heats up really quick. It boils water really quick. So we're just melting our butter in here for now. And yeah. So the melted butter, kind of like the brownie recipe, where we took the chocolate and we melted it in the butter together, and then we added to the sugar. We're not using chocolate, obviously, in this recipe. We're using a lot of brown sugar. So we're going to put the brown sugar in our bowl, and once the butter is melted, we're going to add the butter to the brown sugar, and it'll dissolve, and then we got the other ingredients to it. So already this is getting pretty melty. You got to be careful with these induction burners too, because they can get seriously hot, and they can burn things very quickly. They're great for like melting chocolate or something delicate, because you can turn the power down really low so it doesn't burn it. The other nice thing, there's 100 nice things. Everybody should have an induction burner. The other nice thing, as soon as you take the pot off, or as soon as you turn the burner off, whatever is in the pot will stop cooking and stop boiling immediately. And the burner itself stays cool to the touch. The only reason it would heat up is if you have something hot going on the burner and it heats the surface up itself. Otherwise, it's really. There's subtitles. Amy said there's subtitles. Amy said, "Oh, neat, there's subtitles." Blondies are delicious. Blondies, I actually prefer blondies to brownies. A blondie sundae. So yeah, the butter is almost completely melted. And then so to this, we're flavoring it today with the butterscotch and the pecans. I just bought a bag of butterscotch chips, and that's what we're using. Just simple butterscotch chips. They have them in the store. I know at Christmas time they have peppermint chips. Those are fun to put in brownies. You can do Reese's peanut butter. This goes really good with peanut butter. You can do a peanut butter blondie, put Reese's peanut butter chips in it, and that's really good. That's a really good combination. So the pecans I bought, I actually had a hard time finding pecans. What I got was halves. Is the only thing I could find. The chopped pecans were not available, so I just bought halves and I chop them myself. Super easy. I like to use bits and pieces. Like if I'm making pecan pie, I like to use bits and pieces instead of chopped. But for this, I bought whole pieces, and I'll show you how I chopped them in a second. So the butter is completely melted. Doesn't need to be boiling. Doesn't need to be super hot. Just needed to be melted. And we are there. So I'm going to turn the burner off. It does have a fan that runs to keep the surface cooler, but I mean, I put my hand on it just like that, and it's warm, it's not hot. So we're going to go ahead and add the butter to the brown sugar. And then we're going to mix it all together. I'm going to get every last drop out. And then I would start it with a whisk. I start mixing with a whisk. Once I add the flour, it gets a little thick. I might have to switch to a spatula. So to this, I'm going to add our eggs. We have 4 eggs. Add these right in. Again, whenever I'm baking, I think I've said it before, I like to use room temperature eggs. Especially if you're whipping them up, they whip up a lot better. But like when you're adding them to like a cheesecake or to like a pound cake, you want it to be room temperature so that all of your ingredients are room temperature and you don't get any clumps of butter. If you put cold eggs in melted butter like we're doing here, the butter will kind of clump up and seize, which is not good. It'll kind of make like a separated looking. If you've ever made a pound cake and you've added cold eggs to your butter, your creamed butter and sugar mixture, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It looks like curdled little things. So if you use room temperature eggs, you will avoid that altogether. So just mix that together. We're not trying to whip it up, doesn't have to be fancy, just wanted to combine the ingredients. Excuse me. To that, we're going to add our vanilla. I think it was 3 tablespoons. And then we're going to add our salt. It sounds like a lot of salt, but believe it or not, it actually is good. Adds good flavor to it. And a little bit of saltiness in this really sweet caramelly flavor gives it like a little salted caramel flavor, which is really, really good. So just mix all that in. Then we're going to add our flour and our baking powder and baking soda. So let's talk about the leavening in this. There's actually 3 different leavening agents. We have the eggs, which are going to puff it up a little bit. Baking powder and baking soda. So baking powder is actually baking soda with cornstarch mixed into it. And then baking soda is sodium bicarbonate. Just your regular old baking soda. I have a question. Can you show us the bowl so we can see what the mixture looks like? I can. We were having some technical difficulties with the overhead camera, which is why you haven't been seeing what I'm doing. I don't know if it's working now or not. I think you just got a shot of it, but it's just it looks like caramel sauce, to be completely honest. I mean, I'll see if I can. I don't know if you can see it in the. No, maybe. It just looks like caramel sauce. There you can kind of see it with the overhead. So we're gonna add the flour. Oh, we were talking about baking powder and baking soda. So baking powder, again, is the baking soda with cornstarch added to it. Double acting baking powder means that the baking powder reacts and actually does some of the leavening when you add water to it, and then again when you add heat to it in the oven. So baking powder leavens your product twice. Baking soda only leavens it once when you add the water to it. Baking soda reacts with the acids in whatever you're making, and that's what creates leavening. So double acting baking powder. This recipe is really heavy, which is why it has both baking powder and baking soda. Sometimes, like carrot cake, usually has powder and soda because it's a heavier cake. So those are the differences between baking powder and baking soda. They're essentially the same thing, except for a little bit of cornstarch. So we're going to add our flour. It's how much? It is 4 cups of flour. So the ingredients might seem like a lot: 4 cups of flour, 4 cups of sugar. But again, we're making a half sheet pan size recipe, so you're going to get a lot of blondies out of this. So it may seem like a lot, but it's not really too terribly much when you cut it down and you have just a single serving. Let's talk about measuring flour. A couple tips for measuring flour. My first tip is that so you have this big bag of flour, and you have to dip your hand all the way in to get to the bottom of the flour. I just cut the top off. As I'm going down and using it, I just go ahead and cut the top off. That way it's a lot shorter of a distance for my hand to go to get into the bag to measure. It's a lot easier. Whenever you're measuring flour, you always want to level off the scoop. So we're going to take a scoop of the flour, and then with the back of a knife, we're just going to level it off. So you have a nice, clean, even measure. It's not piled up high, it's one even, clean scoop. So we're going to do that 4 times. I had a hard time finding flour too, which is a little crazy. I got this, finally found it at Aldi's, or at Aldi. And they had a whole pallet, so I bought 2 bags of it, just to be on the safe side. I'm not too worried about it being sifted for this recipe. We're just using all-purpose flour. If it was cake flour, I would sift a little bit to lighten it up. But I think that was 3. And one last one for good measure. And that's 4. So we got our flour in. We're going to add our baking powder and baking soda to that. And then before I mix it in, we're going to prep our pan. Oven is already on, preheated to 350 degrees. We're using my wonderful secret ingredient, Pam for baking. Just going to spray the pan lightly, and then get in the edges and corners, and our pan is ready. So now I'm going to start it in the center, mixing with a whisk, and it's getting a little thick. So I'm going to switch over to a spatula. As I'm mixing, I'm turning the bowl and I'm scraping the sides. I'm kind of folding a little bit. We don't really need to fold because we didn't whip up the eggs that much, so it's not super important to fold. We're just kind of making a mess, which is always good. We're just kind of mixing all the ingredients in, trying to get them all in. At this point, it is getting thicker. The consistency I'll show you in a minute. You do want to make sure that you're scraping the bottom of the bowl because there is some flour that sticks to the bottom of the bowl. So as you can see now, the batter is considerably thicker. It's like a thick cake batter. It's smooth. All the ingredients are mixed in really well, but you can see it's a thicker consistency. So to that, we're going to add our butterscotch chips. Oh, I meant to show you how to chop the pecans. It's going to be a little hard, but I'll talk a lot as I'm doing it. Just have the pile of pecans on your cutting board, and then we're just kind of roughly run our knife through them. Just the last little bit. I like to have some big chunks, some small chunks, some medium chunks. I don't like to have dust though. So you could use a food processor, which would be a lot faster to chop up the nuts, but it also run the risk of over chopping them and pulverizing them into flour. So just be careful. If you do use a food processor to chop nuts, put a little bit in at a time. And pulse it really quickly. It's only going to take like 2 or 3 pulses to chop up to the texture, the bit size that we're looking for here. So that's why I just do it with a knife, because it's easier for me to control the chop size. So we're going to put these in our bowl. And then we're going to add this as well. And then we're going to mix all this together, at which point it's really going to start getting thick once we add all of the garnishes in. But that's fine. They're delicious. We love them. And there, ladies and gentlemen, is our blondie batter. So again, I'll show you. It's gotten a lot thicker since the last time I showed you. As batter sits, so you can see it's all nice and chunky and has a hard time falling off the spoon. As batters sit, what happens, there's a couple things that happen. Obviously the baking powder and the baking soda and the leavening agents have a chance to do their magic and make stuff lighter. What also happens is that some of the moisture from whatever you're using, whatever wet ingredients you're using, in this case we used eggs and melted butter, that moisture gets absorbed into the starches in the flour. So the flour molecules then swell up, which creates the thicker batter because they're absorbing the moisture out of it. So anytime you have a batter and you let it sit for a few minutes, cake batter, cookie dough, brownie or blondie batter, pound cake batter especially, you'll notice as it sits, it's going to get a lot thicker in consistency. A lot of times with dough, you do a thing called auto-leasing, which is when you mix the flour and the water very briefly, just to get it together, and then you let it sit, and you let it sit for 15, 20, maybe half hour, which again lets the starches absorb the moisture and it relaxes the dough and makes it easier to work with. So that's where we're at with this. I don't want to, it's going to get thicker by the minute and I'm not going to be able to get it into the pan. So we're going to take it, and this is going to get a little messy, but it's a lot of fun, I promise. It's good fun. Good clean fun. Well, not clean, but good fun. So the pan is sprayed. We're going to go ahead and put the batter into the pan. Since this batter is so thick, I'm not going to pile it into the middle of the pan. I'm kind of going to drop it where I want it to end up in the pan so that we have less spreading to do, because this batter is not going to spread easily, and I'll show you how we're going to do it in just a minute. So kind of put it down the center of the pan, and then I'm filling in the corners, so it just makes it easier. want to get every last bit. Don't leave any stragglers behind. Like the brownies, these are going to bake. You don't want to over bake them. Like we said with the brownies last week, you want them to be fudgy. You don't want to over bake them. So we didn't. So we kind of under baked them a little bit. We're going to do the same with this because we want them to be nice and chewy. Really good blondies. So, do we have overhead? Okay. So what I'm doing is, here I'll show you the pan of batter. You can see it does not spread. It's just chunked in there, on there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little bit of water on my hand, and I'm just going to press. And we're going to press the dough where we want it. The water is going to prevent the dough from sticking to my hand. My hand is fairly clean. You may need to re-wet your hand as you go along. But we're essentially just pressing the dough in to its spot, making a nice even layer of dough. You don't want, you could use pan spray too to make it so it doesn't stick to your hand. But we're just pressing it out into the corners and making it nice and even. This dough batter doesn't really move in the oven, and when I say move, I mean it doesn't really spread out to like fill all the corners and everything, so you kind of need to put it where you want it to end up to be. Like if you were to keep it clumped in the middle, it wouldn't spread out into the pan. It would just kind of stay in the middle and bake up in the middle. So we're just going to evenly spread it out. And now you can see it's nice and evenly spread out throughout the pan. And we're going to, I'm going to wipe my hand off a little bit. And then we're going to put it into our preheated oven. And this is going to bake for about 20 to 25 minutes. Again, like I said, we don't want it to overbake because we want it to remain chewy and moist and really, really nice. So it's only going to bake for about 20 to 25 minutes. It's going to puff up a little bit. It's going to feel set, but it's going to have a little jiggle to it. Then you know it's done. You pull it out, and when you pull it out, it's going to look really puffed up when you pull it out. And then it's going to collapse. So I'll show you. I'll pull it up in just a minute. So when you first pull it out of the oven, it's going to be all nice and puffy, and you're going to be like, ooh, ah, it raised up off the sides. It looks really nice. And then it's going to collapse. It kind of looks like a chocolate chip cookie. It collapses down. Don't worry, that's perfectly normal. You want that to happen. It is baked. It's completely baked. It just collapses down onto itself when it comes out of the oven for unknown reasons. And then, like the brownies, we're going to turn it out of the pan to cut them. Let me make a little space here real quick. Move that over. We're going to turn our cutting board this way. We flipped our blondies and they pop right out of the pan, nice and clean. And I'm going to flip them back the other way so they're right side up. And there you have beautiful blondies out of the pan. Ooh, ah. You can smell them through the camera and taste them through the camera. They're amazing. We're going to slide them off onto our sheet pan, onto our cutting board, so that we can cut them and taste them. Just like we did the brownies. And then we're going to cut these into very generous size pieces. We're going to cut long ways first, so we're making down the center, we're making 2 really long bars, and then we're going to cut those in half. So we have 4 really long bars. The edges may crack off a little bit, that's not a problem. Then we have 4 bars. And then we're going to go the opposite way down the center. We're going to lose a little bit there. Push it up so it doesn't go on the floor. And then we're going to do, so we're doing 6 by 4. So you're getting 24 out of the pan. They smelled really good when they were baking. And there you have it. Whether you like a centerpiece or an edge piece, the edge gets nice and crusty. You can see, I promise you they're baked. You can see they're just really good and chewy and gooey and moist. Excuse me. Really good blondies. So that's the end. Obviously, it's going to get a little brown and crunchy. If you like a centerpiece like I do, there's the centerpiece for you. I'm going to go ahead and taste these. You can top them off with some vanilla ice cream, some caramel sauce, peanut butter sauce. As always, they're amazing. Delicious, chewy, sweet. You get that salt. When you get a little taste of that salt in there with the sweetness, it's so good. It's like having a chocolate covered pretzel. Delicious. I need these. Yes, well, you can order them. Hop onto my Facebook page, shoot me a message. You can order blondies, brownies, anything I make on the show, you can order to have. Oh, they're falling apart here. They're just melting in your mouth. So with that, I hope you guys had a fun time. Short but sweet show today. Very sweet show. Next week we're going to do something a little different. We're going to go on the savory side. We're going to be making biscuits next week. So we're going to do a smoked cheddar buttermilk biscuit. We've been doing a lot of sweet stuff, so I figure why not do show some savory baked items. So that's going to be next week. We're going to do the smoked cheddar biscuit. I'll post the recipe probably on Wednesday for that. Until then, my name is Brian. This was Cooking with Brian Live. Bon appetit.